It's not every day you find a steam locomotive with such an unlucky path as this particular locomotive in the eastern half of the United States. Dismantled in the shops, this K4 from the Pennsylvania Railroad has persisted through failure, retirement, and bitterness from so many around her. But despite this locomotive's headlight has shined the brightest among the surviving PRR steam locomotives. Her name is Pennsylvania Railroad number 1361. The tale of this locomotive is very perplexing and involves a lot of history, frustration, and grit. Let's dismantle the history of one of the official state steam locomotives of Pennsylvania. The engine that would become number 1361 started back in 1914. There, the first engine of the Pennsylvania Railroad's durable K4 class of Pacific engines would be developed. Pennsylvania Railroad number 1737 rolled out of the Altoona works in 1914. The K4's construction was preceded by 3 other classes of Pacifics on the Pennsylvania Railroad that proved to be successful. With those 3 classes of Pacifics already developed, the K4 was all the good parts of those 3 other classes of Pacifics rolled into one new class. In addition, the K4s were also built to replace the Atlantics and the Americans on the heavier passenger trains of the Pennsy. Number 1737 was put in charge of trains like the Broadway Limited and proved to be a very reliable locomotive. The Pensy's management placed an order for the first batch of K4 locomotives. In 1917, 41 K4 class engines rolled out, and one batch later, Our Little Girl, Pennsylvania Railroad number 1361, the 21st locomotive out of her home railroad's batch in Altoona, rolled out, finished on May 18, 1918. The locomotive and the rest of the K4s were built with 80-inch diameter driving wheels, 27 by 28-inch cylinders, and an overall weight of 304,500 pounds. With a boiler pressure of 205 pounds per square inch, she was a very adequate passenger locomotive. She was capable of producing a tractive effort of 44,460 pounds and a top speed of nearly 100 miles an hour. The locomotive, primed with a PRR 3-chime whistle, rolled out on the very same day that she was finished and started her career on the prestigious Broadway Limited from New York City to Chicago. She worked on the Broadway Limited through the Roaring Twenties, the Dirty Thirties, and the War Years. When she wasn't hauling the Broadway Limited, 1361 would also haul other passenger trains across the PRR system after newer locomotives for the Broadway Limited came to take over the service. By the early 1950s, 1361 was reassigned to Central New Jersey to pull regular passenger trains on the New York and Long Branch. She really was an honorable steam locomotive of the Pennsy, reliable, efficient, and loved. The engine had a wonderful career hauling passenger trains for the Standard Railroad of the world. However, her fall from grace would come not too long after she came to New Jersey. The decline of number 1361 came in the mid-1950s when the Pennsylvania Railroad received new diesel locomotives to replace their reliable but aging fleet of steam engines. In 1956, after 1361 traveled over 2,469,000 miles in revenue service, she was removed from the Pensy's active list of steam locomotives. She was spared from the cutter's torch and kept in storage. The management of the Pennsy ultimately decided to move her to the Horseshoe Curve in the town where it all began. The Pennsylvania Railroad officially donated 1361 to the Horseshoe Curve chapter of the National Railway Historical Society before she was placed on display at the curve. That summer, on June 8th of 1957, number 1361 was ceremoniously placed at the curve in Altoona with 1,600 people coming to watch the event. Parked at Horseshoe Curve, this seemed to be the engine's final chapter, left on display for the public, but preserved. However, her life would get renewed almost 2 decades later. By 1985, the engine was looking beat down and severely weathered. The Railroaders Memorial Museum in Altoona, Conrail, and Rick Geist, a Republican member of the House of Representatives in Pennsylvania, as well as a board member of the Railroaders Memorial Museum, worked to move 1361 to the Altoona shops. On Monday, September 5, 1985, Conrail came to remove 1361 from her display site. After several hours of work, 1361 was moved out of her spot at 3:30 p.m. with the help of Conrail engines SD40 number 6290 and SD45 number 6659. At slope interlocking, 1361 passed by an EMD GP9 diesel locomotive numbered 7048, which was slated to take 1361's spot at the curve. Ironic, isn't it? On September 16th, 1361's former displayed location at Horseshoe Curve was taken by number 7048. After she was moved back to Altoona, the engine would be cosmetically restored and permanently relocated to the Railroaders Memorial Museum. However, vital public interest in the locomotive being operationally rekindled sparked interest in Pennsylvania's government. The state liked the idea of one of the Penske's K4s returning to service. With the state supplying grants to the project, plans were finalized to get the engine back under steam. Work commenced on April 15, 1986 in a disused Conrail shop in Altoona. In June of that year, Dora McCormick came aboard to oversee the restoration of number 1361. McCormick had been instrumental in the effort to restore Southern Pacific number 4449 for the American Freedom Train tour that ran in 1975 and 1976. He was made the chief mechanical supervisor of the project and oversaw the entire restoration. With the help of 51 volunteers, this old locomotive would have her life renewed. 1 year later, this locomotive's whistle echoed throughout the Keystone State. On April 9, 1987, number 1361's fire was lit once more. Work continued to prep the engine for test runs at night, but a series of issues with the locomotive, including leaks in the tender and issues with the engine's air brakes, continued to delay the restoration. However, on April 12th, Pennsylvania Railroad number 1361 moved under her own power for the first time in decades to start her new excursion career. She performed a test run between Altoona, Pennsylvania and Bellefonte, Pennsylvania across Conrail, the Nittany and Bald Eagle, and the Bellefonte Central trackage. After the test runs proved successful, 1361 began her excursion career on June 21st of 1987 when she pulled her very first excursion. She left Altoona and headed to Vail, where she picked up her passengers and then departed for Bellefonte and returned. 1361 proved to be a very popular locomotive in the Northeast, and many flocked to see her excursions across Pennsylvania. Toward the end of 1987, 1361, along with fellow PRR steam locomotive number 3750, were designated as the official state steam locomotives of Pennsylvania on December 18th of 1987. 1988 would start out with 1361 pulling her excursions throughout Pennsylvania, but things took a turn for the worse very quickly. 1361 would suffer a catastrophic failure of its main bearing and driving axle during an excursion run out of Altoona.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
She was taken out of service, and the locomotive was slated to have a quick rebuild and return to service. But more issues were found with 1361 that demanded immediate attention. In 1996, the K4 was dismantled and moved to Steamtown National Historic Site in Scranton, Pennsylvania, where the repairs commenced with the help of Steamtown, the University of Scranton, and the Railroaders Memorial Museum in Altoona. It was also during that time that the ownership of the engine transferred from the Horseshoe Curve chapter of the National Railway Historical Society to Steamtown National Historic Site. This was done to make the restoration of the engine easier. The state of Pennsylvania under Governor Tom Ridge supplied a $420,000 grant for the repairs of the engine to start. Rachel Conway perhaps summed up the entire restoration by stating, quote, "Every broken pin and bolt had to be replaced with handmade duplicates." The state later provided $600,000 in the year 2000 as the groups restoring the engine kept running low on cash to restore the engine. As the restoration continued, finish dates kept getting pushed back as more problems were found with 1361. Throughout the 2000s, the restoration of the K4 would progress in fits and starts. However, in 2007, many of the smaller components of 1361 were sent back to the Railroaders Memorial Museum in Altoona. With no end in sight, Altoona stopped funding in 2007, and by 2010, the restoration of 1361 was officially cancelled. The museum had a plan for the engine to operate as a semi-static piece, which would allow the museum to operate the locomotive at a very low steam pressure around the museum property and to blow the whistle, but those plans were also cancelled. By 2013, the components of 1361 were off of Steamtown property. The frame, tender, and other pieces of the locomotive were sent back to Altoona, while the boiler was stored at the shuttered East Broadtop Railroad. 2 years later, in 2015, Steamtown National Historic Site officially transferred ownership of the engine to the Railroaders Memorial Museum in Altoona. The engine seemed to have a bleak and uncertain future, with pieces of her lying across the state. Luckily, the engine's story does not end here. In May of 2018, Bennett Levin and former Norfolk Southern CEO Wick Moorman announced the creation of a restoration fund to operationally restore 1361 on behalf of the Railroaders Memorial Museum. The initial restoration cost was estimated at $750,000, with work starting later in 2018. Simplifying the laundry list of issues for the locomotive, the engine needed a new crown sheet, new firebox patches, and a stronger boiler. Later in 2018, new parts for 1361 had been fabricated and were ready for installation. When 2019 started, the group was designing a new boiler that would meet FRA and mechanical engineering standards since the old boiler was beyond repair. In October, the engine's tender neared complete restoration. The trucks were upgraded to roller bearings and the engine's water scoop was restored for demonstration purposes. The PRR back in the age of steam would use the water scoop to have their steamers pick up water on the track without stopping. While common in the UK, the practice was very limited in the United States. Out of all the major railroads in the US, the Pennsylvania Railroad and the New York Central were the only two major companies that used a track pan system. On June 24, 2021, the Railroaders Memorial Museum announced that it had hired the contracting firm FMW Solutions to complete the restoration. As of 2023, the total cost of all the restorations of 1361 come in at a total of $2.6 million. With the state of 1361, it seems like this locomotive now has a stable future ahead of her under the guidance of Wick Moorman and the renewed efforts of the Railroaders Memorial Museum. Hopefully, the state of Pennsylvania will hear the thunder and the roar of their state steam locomotive in the not-too-distant future. Pennsylvania Railroad number 1361 has had a roller coaster life. From her revenue service life to her initial retirement at Horseshoe Curve to her restoration and her failed excursion career, this locomotive has undoubtedly come across incredible odds. Pennsylvania Railroad number 1361 is a steam locomotive that finally has its headlight shining at the end of its long and grueling tunnel of despair. As writer Patricia Diacont put it, it was hard for many nostalgia buffs to see number 1361, one of two K4 steam locomotives left in the world, go uncared for. Then, someone decided to take care of the old lady.